questions, you're more than welcome to come to that mic on the floor. And in the meantime, I'll ask my 2 questions, and then we can carry on with that. But we'll keep this short for 25 minutes or something. My first question to the panel is that I guess all 4 of you, or at least 2 or 3 of you agree that the state is on its way out. What has been happening in the Middle East is that the structure of the state has probably become very, it has failed to restructure itself according to the changing needs of the people. So, but at the same time, people who revolted against the state were probably the kinds of people who were expecting something for nothing. So, given the fact that increasingly the weed of democracy has spread to the Asian countries, Africa, and Middle East, who are increasingly expecting something for nothing, what will happen if the state indeed collapses, and you will then have more people who are looking for something for nothing? So I'm just trying to understand what you see as the future of the world in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Maybe we could start with Mr. Rule.
I think they had a phrase for that in history: the king is dead, long live the king. I think people that have overthrown the state are against the state. They're for their own state. And this may sound pessimistic, but I don't see why anything would change. As Doug points out, what comes after the revolution is a different kind of thug. They just sort of change tax collectors. I'm not sure how it changes qualitatively. It would be lovely if, in some strange corner, somebody like Doug succeeded and there was at least an experiment, some small experiment with freedom, so that people could compare the achievement of that corner with the status quo. But I suspect for most of the world, some version of the status quo where the team of thugs that suited their needs the best is the outcome that most people would prefer.
Yeah, I echo what Rick said 100%. But one thing I did when I was in Cairo a few weeks ago, I decided to join some other guys in buying some buildings in Cairo. So, got to turn that lemon into lemonade.
Mr. Snelson?
Well, I think it should be made clear that when we're talking about the so-called collapse of the state, and it's been suggested by Casey and Rule, and certainly any of us here would, Butler Shaffer, could spend an hour or so probably just talking on that one point. But if you believe that when the state collapses there will essentially be so-called anarchy, that could be in the short term, if you mean chaos. But again, as it's also been suggested, rarely, if ever, when there's an overthrow of a political institution, is it followed by something less tyrannical than what they had. And history is replete with example after example after example of this kind of thing. So I wouldn't look forward to anything better if and when the state collapses. And furthermore, if you look at history, the ability to predict the future, those who've tried to do this have a pretty crappy track record. I certainly don't try to predict the future. However, if you understand the principles of cause and effect that lead to social destruction, the seeds have been laid, the foundation is laid for the collapse of the United States, the collapse of Canada, the collapse of the West. I see no turnaround from the causal factors that will lead to this collapse. When these things will happen are virtually impossible to predict. A number of variables approach infinity. So you can't make, it's just like people, pride themselves, or someone later will say, well, this guy predicted America's Great Depression. Well, that's baloney. There were always people predicting depressions. All that happened was, when the depression came, it came when this Joe Zilch predicted it. It's not that he had any better information than anybody else. And so you just have to be very cautious about your predictions. And I'm basically not a pessimist. I'm optimistic about the future. I'm not a prognosticator of doom. However, doom, I have to admit, does seem to be looming.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm, as one who's very interested in chaos theory, the ability to predict outcomes of complex systems just is rather impossible to do. I think if and when the state collapses, it's not going to come about as a result of any greater moral or intellectual awakening on the part of people. I think it'll be a lot like the Soviet Union. It'll simply collapse of its own dead weight. In other words, much like the dinosaur that was unable to respond to whatever the condition was that brought about its demise, a comet or whatever. I think it'll just get to the place where it just can no longer function, can no longer carry out the purposes that people have an expectation of being able to do. I do think that there are a number of very positive forces at work in the world right now, much of it driven by technology, much of it but driven in terms of the decentralization of information, the ability to generate, to communicate, to absorb, to analyze information like that in matters of seconds and so forth rather than weeks or months, may be an opportunity to experience what Jay was talking about earlier in terms of a paradigm shift that Thomas Kuhn might have recognized. In other words, the system just doesn't work anymore. Is there a new paradigm that might offer a better way of functioning? I did also have to throw, the word democracy has been thrown around. I've got to get out my pet definition of it. That democracy is the belief that, the illusion, I should say, that my wife and I combined have twice the political influence of David Rockefeller. So, anyway.
Mr. Snelson, you in V50, you talk, you devote almost one lecture on creating an image for liberty. Now, I know maybe the libertarian movement looks much bigger, given that the information technology has made it possible for people to know each other. My question for you is that has there been an increase in people who believe in liberty, and if not, then the image question that you address in V50, why has it not materialized so far?
Well, I don't know that I have an explicit answer for that question. We do know that all people believe their paradigms of cause and effect are true, and they act accordingly. We know that each person, more than anything else, guards his paradigms. How many of you have tried to convince somebody, in a social gathering over a cocktail that, well, everything you believe is wrong?
Sure,
And, I could talk to your buddies, the same people you talk to, and I consider myself to be fairly articulate. And I could talk to these guys all evening, all day, all week, for months, and probably make zero progress in getting them to modify their paradigms of social causality. One reason that B50 worked as well as it did is that we didn't allow questions until session 4. And usually what happens, as soon as somebody asks a question, let's say from a socialist perspective, which is, collectivist, socialist, interventionist perspective, which is almost everybody's perspective, especially if they went to school and they're well read and bright. as soon as you challenge them on this, their mind goes clunk. And if you're trying to debate with somebody in front of their peer friends or a guy's wife, or conversely, you're never going to make it. Nobody's going to admit they're wrong in front of their friends. Intellectual honesty is one of the rarest virtues there is. So we're fighting all of these things. But if we have a positive image of, let's say, the free market, that is catchy, that catches on. Unfortunately, historically, especially in the United States and in the West, the people we think of as the great promoters or image builders or icons of capitalism were anti-capitalistic. And someone mentioned that in today's talk, and I don't know, maybe it was Butler, I don't know, but or Rick, anyhow, that we have these so-called businessmen who can't wait to go to the state in order to get some law passed to give them some monopolistic advantage. But they're perceived to be capitalist. Well, they're not. They're anti-capitalists. They violate certainly every principle of morality. And even some of our great capitalistic icons. Take, for example, Andrew Carnegie. I have great respect for Andrew Carnegie. And you know, he gave us 1,200 in Canada and the United States. I think he bequeathed something like 1,200 libraries. And if you adjust for inflation, you know, this is back in the 30s. This is a huge amount of money. But this great bastion of capitalism, Andrew Carnegie, was frustrated because he's in the steel industry and he's got a very serious problem. He's trying to sell steel to Americans. And the problem he runs into is that the British also make steel. And it's not so much that the British make steel, but they make better steel for less money. And even absorbing the shipping costs coming over from England and Scotland, they can still sell better steel for less money. Carnegie says this is not fair. This is not fair. We need a law. And so he goes to Congress and he gets a law passed. It's called a protective tariff, protectionism, the protective tariff, one of the great disasters in political history, which was a principal factor leading to the American Civil War, which is one of the most stupid wars in the history of wars. That's another whole subject. All wars are stupid. Just an aside here, I better shut up. I'll go on and on. But you can't understand World War II unless you understand World War I. You can't understand World War I unless you understand the Spanish-American War. You can't understand that war until you understand the Civil War. One of the great mythologies that almost all Americans have accepted hook, line, and sinker as the Civil War was fought to free the black slave from bondage slavery. That is pure bullshit. The Civil War was fought for a singular reason, and that was to preserve the Union. The Northerners didn't like the fact that, oh my God, we're going to lose half the taxpayers. Half of our people cannot be regulated and controlled by us. This is a terrible thing. You will not secede, which means to leave or quit or go home. We're not allowed this. If you try to secede, we'll kill you. And they did. That's what they did. Maybe I'm wandering off the question. I'll just end here so the other gentleman can continue. But essentially, the problem of the image we have of, for example, capitalism, I don't think the word capitalism is even salvageable. I don't think anarchy is a term that's salvageable. We've discussed that either. I don't call myself an anarchist. One of the problems with anarchy is it doesn't tell you how to create prosperity beyond belief. It just tells you, well, the state's bad. Well, among the most articulate writers against the state have been outright socialists and communists. No more articulate. Everything said about the state is true. But what is their solution? Communism and socialism. That's the most irrational, immoral concept ever conceived by the human mind. Anyhow, so what we have to do is to build a positive image for what I call win-win profit, win-win business, and that's part of what's been missing. And I hope someday at our prestigious universities like Harvard University, maybe they teach their MBAs something about business morality. I've seen no evidence of it yet. They have no concept of morality that I can see. Anything goes, anything for a buck seems to dominate most of the mentality of our MBAs. Anyhow, I wandered off.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
So maybe I can move to
Also, can I make just one comment? I agree with a great deal of what Jay said, except I wouldn't call it the Civil War. It wasn't a civil war. It was a war of secession, which is very different from a civil war. So technically it should be called the war between the states.
That is correct. It's just called Civil War. That's what it's generally called. Capital C, capital W.
Yeah, but no, but it's a bad idea to call it the Civil War because it's using the word improperly. It's like they talk about health care and health insurance. It's totally improper. It's medical care, medical insurance. It confuses people.
I won't argue with Casey on that.
Okay, Mr. Casey, one question for you. You were talking about the world and the society converting into a system of files. Now, given that so many people and increasingly people believe in something for nothing, how sustainable would such a decentralized society be? Won't it, by its interaction and its mentality and attitude, create the cancerous growth called the state eventually again?
I don't think so, because you could have thousands of types of files where people get together. That's the nice thing about the internet. It makes it possible for you to find who your true countrymen are. They're not just people that live in some goofy geographical entity. They're not my countrymen. I've got nothing in common with the average American. So you can find your countrymen anywhere in the world based on what's important to you. Business, economics, philosophy, thousands of things. And there's no political implications to that at all. Although eventually you might decide that, well, we like each other, maybe we can work together to form an insurance company or form kind of an informal police force to defend members. That might evolve. But it wouldn't be a government. It's voluntary belonging to the files.
So does that mean that this interaction of free market files would improve the character of the society?
Well, I think it would, but we're still dealing with, you got 6.5 billion aberrated chimpanzees on this planet. So you're not going to cure their psychological problems, but I think they'll be ameliorated by a better order. Yes. Because, and the reason I say that is because look at Germany. It was very polite and nice, and everything was fairly nice in the 1920s. But you change the way the state is, by the 1930s, all the sociopaths come out from under their rocks. So you got to make it as hard as possible for the sociopaths to come out from under the rocks. You got to try to keep them under the rocks. I think this is probably better, the files, than the state.
Since he brought that up, just a brief point. One of the things that concerns me most about the West and America in particular, I'm amazed at how few people are concerned about what is called inflation and ultimately hyperinflation. You talk to people, it's like, oh, you know, what's that got to do with anything? Most of you in the room know that the Nazis in Germany, before there was hyperinflation came about because of the Treaty of Versailles. The reparations that were against the Germans were beyond the amount of wealth in all of Germany. They never could have paid it. So the only way we can pay it off legally is by printing up money. Before this happened, nobody paid any attention to the Nazis. These guys were a bunch of clowns, that crackpots. And it wasn't until the German hyperinflation, and this was alluded to by somebody on the panel here, inflation does this. It wipes out the middle class. Now the people at the top in these inflations, they usually have enough knowledge, enough assets, they can pretty well protect themselves from a hyperinflation. The people at the bottom who don't have anything, They don't have anything to lose because they don't have anything anyhow. The inflation wipes out the people who make the damn place run. Physicians, engineers, architects, builders. These are the middle class people who are wiped out by the inflation. And this was a principal factor that brought the Nazis to power in 1933 in Germany. So I'm sorry for that aside, but I just wanted to get that in. Go ahead.
Good. One more question. That's my last question before Paul Geddes has his question. My last question is that this is just very anecdotal experience, and I can be completely wrong here. But of course, India and China are becoming increasingly very wealthy. At the same time, they are becoming very materialistic. Now, I don't know if they are at the same time in getting interested in ideas, which has so far in the last at least 100 years or 200 years been resided in the West. So now that that is going away in the West, and India and China and maybe now other countries are becoming much richer, is this a dangerous cocktail? If at all they are not becoming interested in ideas, is it a dangerous cocktail that people, they might be becoming materialistic and might be getting more interested eventually in wars? And I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think the future might hold for these countries. Maybe Mr. Wu could respond.
Well, you know, right now for me the face of India is giant, and I've admired the fact that over the last 2 years you've taken it upon yourself to get richer. I certainly feel less threatened by you. There's less that I have that you want. And I would suspect, I remember Muhammad Yunus saying, you know, he's traveled to all these countries. I'm not, by the way, deifying Mr. Yunus. But he said that, you know, if the sort of sum of human experience is 360 degrees, that there's probably 3 or 4 degrees that's different between people. Most people want to be happy. Most people want to look after their family. Most people want to have friends. Most people want the same thing. And my hope is that as people become, well, it's been shown that as people become a little more free, they get a little rich. And my hope is that the West looks at the East and figures out that although China certainly hasn't become free, becoming a little more free and having impetus from Deng Xiaoping saying to be rich is glorious, that perhaps the leadership that's been shown by the frontier and emerging markets will lead to a regeneration in the West. I don't think there's anything to be feared from the fact that certain frontier societies have become a little more free as a consequence of becoming a lot more rich, particularly when you look at it from our own prism, which shows how much poorer we've become by being a little less free. So I see all that as hopeful.
Anyone else has any thoughts on it?
Well, I think the trend in China overall is positive, but I'm one of those folks, I can't forget Chinese history, at least recent Chinese history. I know a lot of people who go to China and they're pretty positive about what they see, but for somehow I have stuck in my head that between Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong, they murdered 77 million of their own people to try to make communism work. So it's hard for me to go to a place like China. I just can't, that would be in the forefront of my mind. I don't care how great the buildings are or whatever they're doing. I would always remember that. And, but one thing we should be very happy about is that thus far at least, the United States and China have never gone to war. Thank God that hasn't happened. And hopefully, as we see the Chinese, it's only this pragmatism of the Chinese that's brought them away from their communism, which is the most inefficient concept ever conceived by the human mind to do anything. And so because they have a history of being pragmatic, realistic, practical, they realize, well, this whole damn communist crap doesn't work. But they don't want to lose power. They want to stay in power, and so they also have the largest number of political prisoners today on the planet. And you do remember Tiananmen Square. And, the number of students that they slaughtered is probably 2 or 3 times the number that was admitted, but that's not the point. So hopefully, and I hope what will happen is over time they will become more and more liberal in the classic sense of toward freedom, and this will be positive for everybody.
Great.
I'd like to just go back to your question rather briefly, and that is that I don't think that our behavior is driven by ideas. As much as I've enjoyed reading the ideas of other people, I don't think our behavior is driven by them. I think our ideas are afterthoughts, things that we come up with to explain away, to rationalize, to justify where we are. I believe this about morality, for example. I believe morality is nothing more than a rationalization of what one's lifestyle or position and so forth might be. And I go back to the point that I was making in my talk about the response that I had in the study of political philosophy to various philosophers. A very positive response to some, very negative response to others, and kind of a mishmash response to yet some others. And recognizing that it was something within me, something within my own called spirit or whatever else that I was reacting to. And it may very well be that the consequences of what's going to come in the future may be explained or may be observed in what Jay was talking about in terms of Thomas Kuhn's interest in paradigm shifts. Because Kuhn says a paradigm shift occurs when the old paradigm no longer works. And you've got a new paradigm that appears to be more plausible. And in that sense, I think it's rather encouraging. But I don't think it's going to be because people suddenly began to read Ayn Rand or anything like this. And suddenly the world is going to change. It's not going to change that way.
Okay, Mr. Gideas.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing pessimism in politics for this reason. You're treating politics as if it's very different from business. You don't look at a business and say, your telephone isn't perfect, therefore it's horrible. Every little businessman invents a little bit better telephone, every computer's a little bit better, every program's a little bit better. And slowly over time, well, my world is much better than my parents', and I think my children's world's going to be better than mine. In just recent years, you've already talked about Deng Xiaoping, but Moyamar Singh with the end of the license, and Alfred Kahn allowing the airplanes to fly. And here in Canada, we had a very small change, but in 1995, Paul Martin stopped the growth of government. As a percentage of GDP, it just leveled off, which is amazing compared to what's happening before. So why do you say the only solution is pessimism when there have been things that have made my life better?
I don't think anybody said the solution is pessimism. Let me just comment on one thing. You implied that there is no difference between politics and entrepreneurship or proprietorship or business. That these two concepts are 180 degrees out of phase. Politics always goes after you with a gun. If you do not comply, you will be fined, imprisoned, or killed. If you want to challenge me on this, I will tell you how to test this out. This is observable. It is undeniable. It is incontrovertible. Anybody who looks will see the same thing that we see here at this table. All you got to do is look. Opposite of all politics is entrepreneurship or proprietorship or business, where I do not go after my customer with a gun. I simply say, look, sir, I've got a product here. This is a fantastic product. Here's why it's the greatest product. I might say the greatest product in the world, but I'm not going to force you to buy it. I'm so damn confident that my product is good. If you don't like it, I'll return your money fully. That's got nothing, that's the opposite of the state. That is a win-win concept. Everything the state does is win-lose. Now you say, but hasn't the Canadian state backed off a little bit from their socialism? Well, I understand they have. Hasn't communist China backed off from their communism somewhat? Well, sure they have. Is this positive? Of course it is. But we have to look at history in terms of a longer trend. And are we seeing just a little blip, and then it goes back up, and maybe a little blip, and we're in the blip, everything looks great, and then it takes off again. So I couldn't disagree more with your premise.
Can I take a second shot at that?
Sure, of course.
I think the middle ground might be if we acknowledge Mr. Geddes' point, which is that the flu is better than malaria. And the level of government in Canada has decreased, or at least the growth in government has decreased, which I think is absolutely a good thing. I think it's important for those of us who are interested in freedom to remember to be tolerant of people's views that are better than most and perhaps not as pure as our own. I was at Freedom Fest last week, and there was a lot of stuff that I saw there that was, for want of a better phrase, Republican. And I'm afraid of all those things, but I've learned myself. There was a guy named Michael Emerling Cloud, who many of you may know, who was a Libertarian Party propagandist, despite the stupidity of us having a party where we're opposed to politics. He taught us a lot about how to sell libertarianism, and it had everything to do with emphasizing the parts of our point of view that were similar, so that we could bring each other along in some fashion. And so the extent to which Mr. Geddes has found that Canada is a more tolerable place to live as a consequence of the fact that they downgraded their disease from malaria to the flu is a good thing. And it's actually a solution in the near term, because it's the near term that we all live in. But I think everybody needs to aspire to do better. And part of doing better is the fact that amongst ourselves, these idiotic internecine feuds that we have to recede and recognize the points of view that we have in common, as opposed to fight quite as vigorously as we do with the points, the somewhat smaller points that divide us.
I just want to respond to your question. The problem is that you're getting into sort of a mixture of processing. And I would go back to Franz Oppenheimer's observation that there are two basic means by which the exchange, by which our material well-being can be undertaken. One is what he called the economic means, which was the voluntary exchange of goods and services and so forth. The other is the political means, which was the use of legalized force to accomplish things you couldn't accomplish in the marketplace. You use the example of, different qualities of telephone service, different qualities of computers, and so forth, which I would accept, but telephones and computers are something that I want. To be violated, to have someone engage in violence against me is not something I want. So I think it's a poor example to try to suggest there are varying degrees of coercion, varying degrees of violence, when violence ought not to be engaged in the first place. I would ask you in response to that, would you rather have lung cancer or emphysema? That's the political choice.
I agree.
Or would you rather have good health?
I don't have that choice.
No, that's right.
Look, I'd like to just throw something out that occurred to me. Maybe part of our trouble in promoting the win-win concept is that I think in the natural world, not the human world, but the world of nature outside humanity, people see a win-lose. The dog-eat-dog thing is a win-lose paradigm. And maybe they project that onto the realm of humanity incorrectly. And that maybe that's something that we could work on that. It's sort of a thought that may help us. I also wanted to mention.
Let me just comment on that since I teach win-win theory. What you say is correct, but we have a lot of misconceptions. We have a lot of pseudo-intellectual nonsense that does have to be addressed and does have to be overturned with the science of social causality. The science of social causality, social implies human interaction. And yes, in nature, we know that it, to use a term that was not Darwin's, but attributed to him, there is the survival of the fittest. However, humans are the only species that is able to understand cause and effect. And when DougCasey says you have to accept your consequences, that's absolutely correct. But the next step certainly, and it implies that you understand cause and effect in order to know what consequences you might be accepting. Because if you don't know cause and effect, you don't know crap about anything. And that's really the basis. I will repeat again. The whole crisis for the Western world is the miseducation of the educated classes. And until that's corrected, the whole Western world is going to go down the toilet.
The win-lose model is premised, I think, on the idea that there are values, particularly in the economic setting, there are values that are objectively determined. So there's an objective standard for value, and so therefore we can evaluate whether one person won in a transaction or somebody else lost in a transaction. Whereas in any free exchange, both parties have to gain, or at least they anticipate each is going to make a gain. And this in itself also requires a recognition that all value is subjective. How you value something, how I value something is completely different. That's what makes markets so wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
I also wanted to just mention D. Hogg wrote a book about, and it's called Chaotic or something or other, about his experiences with the Visa organization before it was a giant corporation. And it was very interesting to me. Now, there is a chaotic outfit out in San Francisco that has somehow got some sort of idea that people have rights to various things, and they're not, they have gone the wrong way with the chaotic concept. But the D. Hogg original has some very interesting things about alternate, voluntary ways of organizing. And also I'd like to mention thedailybell.com, a newsletter out of Austria that has interviewed, among others, Rick Rule and I believe DougCasey, that if any of you have not seen or heard, you might want to check out. thedailybell.com.
Great, thank you very much. I think we have come, we must close this day today. It's been more than 8.5 hours since you've been sitting here, so I really appreciate that you had the patience to sit here. My immense gratitude and thanks to the speakers, all the people who came here, and especially for people who came from Calgary, recorded the event, and they added a lot of excitement to the event. There are people here from California, Australia, and China. I want to very especially thank them. Most importantly, I want to thank my colleague Rajni, who has hardly slept in the last 1 week to make this event possible. So I hope to see you again next year in the same Capitalism and Morality Seminar. Thank you very, very much. Enjoy the evening and the rest of the weekend. Thank you very much.